Oliver Ekman-Larsson speaks to the South Florida media. And where do the Florida Panthers rank as far as most improved teams? We're going to discuss this and more on today's Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into this Friday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter and Instagram at LO_FLA Panthers. And shout out to the everydayers who come back here and get your daily Florida Panthers fix. So, Cats fans, this is the time of year where the new signees of the Florida Panthers, of course, they are on their fair share of time off, whether they are across the pond, staying here in their new town, whether they're signing. But Oliver Ekman-Larsson did speak to the media yesterday on Wednesday. We're recording this on a Thursday, release on a Friday. He did speak to the media on Wednesday from Sweden to discuss his signing with the Florida Panthers and to discuss more of that media availability for Oliver Ekman-Larsson and the Florida Panthers is my friend Nick Fairbanks. It is a Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Nick, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me again. I'm glad that we had a week off and ready to jump right into it.
Yeah, welcome back from vacation, my friend. More importantly, I hope you are well rested as well, too. You taking time off just like the NHL players are taking time off as well. But let's go right to the and before we actually go into the media availability for Oliver Ekman-Larsson, a few notes here. Casey Fitzgerald did re-sign a 1-year, 2-way contract, bringing back another defenseman for the Florida Panthers. And the Florida Panthers did actually launch a new app, the Florida Panthers app, that is a different experience as far as game schedules, how you order tickets, food, you name it. It's all combined on the new Florida Panthers app. So a little bit of announcement there. But Oliver Ekman-Larsson did speak to the media on Wednesday to discuss really about him signing with the Florida Panthers. And Bill Zito spoke about this weeks ago about the meeting with Oliver Ekman-Larsson about, I don't want to hear about Las Olas. I don't want to hear about Fort Lauderdale. I just want to discuss winning. And he reinforced that in his media availability yesterday. Did speak about his broken foot at the Worlds, but he's doing better and rehabbing. So even the newcomers of the Florida Panthers are dealing with their fair share of injuries. He did speak about how he doesn't know Gus Forsling, but he's looking forward to working with him. But here is the most important part of what Oliver Ekman-Larsson did say. And this, he did not say this in his media availability, Nick. He actually said this on the Territory Talk podcast that aired on Thursday, that he had a conversation with Patrick Hornquist about the culture and how the fit is in Florida. And it goes back to the whole not trading Patrick Hornquist and still being in good standing with the organization. And that influences a guy like Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who's been a captain, who hasn't been in the best situations in his career, to bring someone in who's just trying to be on a winning team and the first time playing in the Eastern Conference.
We did definitely speak about that, didn't we? About Hornquist and his retirement and what he could bring to the team if he decides to stick around with the organization. So the fact is that he already was able to reel in Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who I think is going to be an upgrade on what the Florida Panthers had on D last season, especially over Mark Stahl, who actually played really well during the playoffs. And then, just having that connection and just telling other people like this team is for real, this organization is for real. They want to win. It's not a dog and pony show like it used to be. I don't like digging down on teams like this, but we don't know what's going on with Arizona right now. There's a lot of things going on. But he was an all-star caliber defenseman for them. So, can't say that he's not going to get back to that level at all. But for some reason, free agents come down here and they find new life, and they either are able to sign an extension with Florida, or it's a one-off and they are able to get a bigger payday somewhere else. So, Patrick Hornquist is already paying dividends in the offseason.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think of sometimes what happens when once again players are put in different situations. I mean, we talked about Forsling being claimed off waivers, but also there was a time where the Anaheim Ducks had three defensemen in Shea Theodore, Hampus Lindholm, and Brandon Montour on the same team. And look what happened when with those three in different situations. The Buffalo Sabres as well. Brandon Montour on that team as well with Jack Eichel, and then Jack Eichel playing with Ryan O'Reilly. Brandon Montour and Ryan O'Reilly were not on the team at the same time, but you think about the different situations that they got themselves in, with Brandon Montour only being traded for a third round pick, which looks like such a win now when you're looking back at the 2021 trade deadline. But also I think about Ekman-Larsson as well, and not having to. He will have to play some top pair minutes early on, more than likely, to start the season. And that's the great thing about his signing as well, that you can for a little bit of time, and then an NHL Network actually put a projection lineup of what they'll look like. The Florida Panthers will look like later in the season, and it had a third pair of Kulikov and Oliver Ekman-Larsson as the third pair. As your first, you're not liking that, but as a third, I mean you're content but not satisfied in that.
No, but you have to think about it this way. The defense is going to be more mobile now. They're going to be able to skate. That I think that's something that was an opportunity last year with the bottom pairing defense. Say what you will, Raiko Gudis is a great defenseman, hit everything and anything he could, and that was part of the issue that he kind of had. He would go for a hit instead of just playing the smart play. But now we have probably six defensemen that can actually skate and be able to maneuver and move the puck where it needs to be. So I think the transition game is about to get a lot better, and teams are going to be backing off the Florida Panthers a lot more than they did last season. But, as long as it's Larson and Kulikov on the third pairing, either one can step back or move the puck. The only thing that I'm worried about with Kulikov is his turnovers and how famous he was for them, unfortunately, in his first stint with Florida. I'm still remembering the 2012 playoffs where he gave up the puck and ended up, giving up the game-winning goal in Game 7.
No doubt, and that was my first memories as a Florida Panthers fan. Unfortunately, when I first started watching this team. So, but we are going to transition over to segment number 2, where we're going to talk more about the defense as well, and more about the players that have been shipped out as well, because the Athletic has ranked the most improved teams this offseason. Where do the Florida Panthers rank in these rankings? We're going to discuss that and more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about FanDuel and take your first swing on betting MLB on FanDuel and get 10 times your first bet amount in bonus bets up to $200. That's right. Just bet $20 and you'll land $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. That's $200 you could spend betting everything from the money line to over under to who you think is going to be when to hit the first home run. All in the app that's safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no better place to bet MLB than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So sign up today. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get up to $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Second segment here on this Friday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's another edition of Fairbanks Friday. Nick Fairbanks is here once again. And Nick, I had the opportunity to to read the Athletics article on most improved teams based on their offseason moves. And I shared a screenshot of it on the Locked On account. And boy, the reactions were wild, and for good reason, too. And let me preface this by saying what it was based on. It was based on goals taken away for guys who went off of the team and who you bring in. And 32 was the Boston Bruins. The Florida Panthers were the 31st ranked team as most improved, second worst in the NHL. And I'll tell you, if I were, before opening this article, which was an article written by Dom Luszczyszyn of The Athletic, I was going to guess that the Florida Panthers were maybe around like the 22, 26 range, because the way I process is the Florida Panthers worked with what they got with the 10 million in space that they had. But what Dom Luszczyszyn wrote, talking about Ekman-Larsson, Kulikov, Mike Riley, and talking about Radko Gudas, kind of overrating Radko Gudas. You spoke about him in the previous segment about the hits, but sometimes he would overcommit on one side that I would leave the other side to dry in transition, and you would have to have Bob or Knight or even Alex Lyon be Superman in that situation and bail him out. And they compared Evan Rodriguez to Anthony Duclair. Yeah, Anthony Duclair is a one-time 30-goal scorer. Yeah, Evan Rodriguez is a late bloomer, but I don't think they go into consideration on what Evan Rodriguez can bring on the forecheck that could not necessarily pad his stats, but if he's on the line with Alexander Barkov and you're creating chances off the forecheck, maybe that helps Alexander Barkov become a 40-goal scorer for the first time in his career. Yeah, injuries have played a factor in that as well. But I just don't think that's also considered. And they don't also consider the subtractions of what happened. You mentioned Mark Stahl. I want to mention Colin White as well, who's not on the team anymore. They were not going to bring him back no matter what happened as well. Giovanni Smith as well. Zach Delpy was in the lineup even though he's still with the organization. He was in the postseason lineup for a little bit of time too. And they don't, and those we were speaking about it all throughout the playoffs and even before that, those guys weren't going to be part of the mold going forward. So I don't think that's really considered when it comes to ranking the Florida Panthers 31st.
So I got two thoughts about this. One, Dom is a Leaf homer, and he always has been. He does not like giving Florida credit. He only has to when the numbers pan out that way, and I think he was okay with how the numbers panned out when he plugged these players in and you subtract Radko Gudas and Anthony Duclair. Second, I think his numbers are faulty because I don't think they take into consideration what these players are going to be able to, I guess, cover. I mean, he did say that Kulikov, Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and Riley are going to be Band-Aids, but it really depends on what their pairing is going to be. I mean, you talked about how, other players, from other organizations came to Florida and all of a sudden something clicked, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it has something to do with the coaching or the culture and everything, because maybe Anaheim didn't have the best coaching. Let's be honest, they haven't had a good coach in probably a decade. Secondly, you have Buffalo. Nobody wanted to be there for a long time. A lot of toxicity in that locker room. And then you come to Florida, and it's like a breath of fresh air. So everybody's able to kind of be themselves and play freely. I happen to think that the stats don't take that into consideration at all. And secondly, again, for Dom, I think the only time that the Leafs were even close to even winning a game in round 2 was game 2. And that's when that's one of the games that Radko Gudas decided to go for a hit or overcommit. And I think, who was it that scored? I think it was the rookie that scored. So
Nice.
Yes, exactly. And so I'm not worried, to be honest. I think we have serviceable defensemen who can actually skate that will actually improve the blue line. But we're going to have to tread water until December, January when Ekblad and Montour get back. But I'm just saying it. Take it with a grain of salt. He's going to write what he's going to write, and he's going to let the numbers bear out what he wants them basically to bear out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's just to see how different writers around are looking at the Florida Panthers, and even how, and even though this is a Florida Panthers based show, there's other avenues that of how they view the Florida Panthers. For example, Jay Fresh sees the Florida Panthers being tied with the Boston Bruins at 104 based on his model. And I'm not sure how the Boston Bruins can even be tied at the top if you're so uncertain about the whole David Krejci and Patrice Bergeron situation as well. And Doug Plagan said on Territory Talk, the longer they take on a decision for Bergeron and Krejci, the more he thinks that they could be back. So that's something to think about and all. But also, Locked On NHL released their offseason power rankings and had Florida fourth, which I think is maybe one off of what I would have them number 3, maybe. They have Toronto 1. Locked On has, and these are voted by the Locked On hosts: Toronto 1, Boston 2, Tampa Bay 3, Florida 4, Buffalo 5, Detroit 6, Ottawa 7, Montreal 8th in that order. So I just don't know how you replace the difference of points there as well with the Boston Bruins in just the uncertainty, and even with Toronto as well. Are they going to trade Nylander? And we haven't even spoke about this yet on the show. The arbitration case between Ilya Samsonov and the Maple Leafs. Oh, it's kind of ugly. It's not pretty. He wants 4.9. The Maple Leafs want to give him 2.4. Like, he wants more than double of what they want. So it's a little bit of a mess there as well. But this is also the other thing, Nick, is we don't know how to predict the Florida Panthers neither coming off the Stanley Cup run. Nobody does because who knows? And I'm not speculating. I'm not going to say this to speculate. Remember how early the guys from Boston came back from injury? Could it be the same thing with the Florida Panthers?
So I'll answer that question first, and I'll kind of go back to a few other points. Possibly. I think Aaron Ekblad probably has a better chance of coming back sooner than Brandon Montour, although some reports say the opposite. We'll see. I guess it just depends on how hard these guys want to work to get back. I mean, what was it? Marchand was supposed to be out to like January, February, and he came back like November, December.
McAvoy, Grzelcyk,
which is amazing. So, I mean, hats off to those guys for working their butts off. But we'll see what happens. You know, I'm not holding my breath right now because usually with Florida Panthers injuries, the only person that's ever, I think, come back sooner was Jonathan Huberdeau after his Achilles injury in the preseason. So back to 2 other points. Number 1, I don't think the Leafs have gotten any better. I think they got worse. So the fact is that, again, that poll that you pulled up saying, you know, who got better, who got worse, I would actually probably put Toronto in the bottom 30 to 32 range because they don't have a goaltender. Let's be honest. They don't have a goaltender. They'd rather pay Matt Murray that $5 million, but they don't want to give Samsonov, you know, who got their goal, you know, got them in the second round, that money. So, I mean, their priorities are wrong. And then back on Duclair real quick. He's a pure goal scorer at heart. He's all about speed. What is Evan Rodriguez? He's a two-way center. Now, he can play other positions as well, which I think will work to Florida's advantage. But I think right there, you're already getting a better overall player. So, other than that, I mean, Boston's going to be Boston. We don't know what's going to happen with them. I do like DeWerk's idea that the longer that they wait, that Bergeron and Krejci will come back. I'm thinking that will probably happen one last time and really right the wrongs. And then, you know, who knows? Maybe the Leafs will drop down to third and we'll see a resurgence of the Lightning.
That one's also hard to predict because they have just so much miles on them too. And they did resign. They did sign Tanner Jeannot to an extension too.
They had to.
and the Cirelli Sergachev contracts kicked in this season too. So it's real. That's another team that's really hard to put a finger on because an early exit, a longer off season for rest too. I don't know, but hey, they still have a top two, maybe even one goaltender in the NHL. So you can't necessarily count them out. And uh, for the Florida Panthers, it's once again they work with what they got in the $10 million, and also in Dom's model, the Maple Leafs are actually ranked 30th in that model. So
Okay, all right.
so
At least they got something right. He got something right.
so the maybe he was not looking too much towards his homerism of the Leafs. So maybe finally starting to see the light there. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 3, where we're gonna talk about the future of the Florida Panthers and the urgency needed of this season, regardless of injuries, and looking at the situation of their cat space and to not get too married to the future number that is for the Florida Panthers coming up. We're going to discuss that more here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Third and final segment here on this Friday, July 21st edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's once again another edition of Fairbanks Friday. Nick Fairbanks is back here on the show. And Nick, just something I really teased in my Monday show, talk about the future of the Florida Panthers. And we know about the whole bunch of expiring contracts for the Panthers that's coming up this season. And coming off a Stanley Cup run, and seeing the projected space. The escrow is reportedly supposed to be paid off this season, which means there's going to be a rise in cap, which you're looking, because this time last offseason, we were discussing, man, when the Florida Panthers have so much more cap room, they're going to be able to make a big splash, getting a big name defenseman with term as well. They were going to take that step back, trading Mackenzie Weegar, and with all their dead cap, but boom, only $1 million raised and now you look at this upcoming offseason, which you still have a season to play. And I look at cap friendly, it's like $29-ish million, but only 8 players on the current roster are signed for next year. How important do you think it is, if the Florida Panthers make the playoffs, is it to make a whole bunch of noise like they did last season?
I think it's imperative. I mean, every organization's goal is to win the Stanley Cup, but in regards to the salary cap, you want players to come here and play. I mean, we talked about, Patrick Hornquist being that, that person who can, be a liaison between free agents and Florida. But at the same time, you're going to want, as a free agent, you're going to want to go play for a winner. I'm jealous of the times where players have taken really cheap deals to go play for a team and try to win a cup. I mean, you think about Joe Thornton, Patrick Marleau, all those players that have tried to win cups. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but you have to wonder if that's ever going to be on the horizon. Now, to me, it's imperative for the team to keep going, keep pushing forward, because they were 3 games away from the ultimate goal. But you have to start thinking about, one, if they make a run like they did last year, how much are those players going to get paid that have expiring contracts? Are they going to want $8-9 million?
I think of Montour automatically.
Yeah, he's either going to be gone or he's going to be making Ekblad money, to be honest with you. So you have that, but the light at the end of the tunnel is, you said it's around $29 million going into next season, only 8 players, right?
Only 8 players signed.
This is the last season with Bobrovsky. It has to be. you have to open up the cap space for that because you have Lundell that's going to need a payday. You possibly have Sam Reinhart if you want him to stick around. He's going to need a little bit more money. You said Montour. Let's see what Forsling's going to want. I mean, I know that there's been people on Twitter saying, or threads, been saying maybe we trade Forsling right now. I'm not for that. I love the guy. But then you have other homegrown talent that you're going to have to sign. And
Lundell.
Exactly. And, depending on if they take the next step or if Lundell continues to play how he did in the playoffs last year, Panthers could be in trouble.
They could. And I calculated the average AAV to fill 15 roster spots. Oh, doing it for the camera. 15 roster spots. And it's about 2 million AAV per player that you would need to fill. If the projected cap is 87.5 million coming, this is where you'll need possibly Mackie Semiskevich to be part of the mix too.
Yes.
And I really and the confidence that guy oozes too. After decamp, and then Brian McCabe talking after, saying that his goal should be to make the NHL roster too. Don't think it'll be this year for sure. We might see him actually later this year, maybe in a game or two, and we'll see his rookie lap this year. But as far as a consistent part of the roster, this is where you're looking to 2024, 25 for sure. And it's like the Panthers did give Grigory Denisenko that one-way deal too. Let's not forget that it's like, hey, we believe in you. We think you need to. We believe that you need to create an opportunity to make this roster, and I believe just by his contract that he has, and just by that alone, that he's going to make it this year too. Let's see how he can do under Paul Maurice now, under under the management that did not draft him too, as well. And the Alexei Epiniemi is the only RFA that hasn't had a contract announced yet, neither, as well. And that's where you're looking to that as well too. And you think of the blue line as well. Is Lucas Carlson going to be taking that next step, even though he's probably going to be a third pair defenseman too? Do you take a risk of signing a free agent D-man in the 2024 class to a 1-year $7 million AAV too? But that takes up a majority of their cap. It doesn't seem like even next year that the Florida Panthers will be going 7-year term for a free agent that's wasn't with their organization neither. And the reason why I want to have this conversation is because we banked on this specific season going to be that year for a good amount of the cap rising, and a lot of GMs were discussing that privately as far as reporting too. But now it's like pivoting, and now you see all these deals that are resetting. The Panthers are resetting, and the group is gonna. Yes, you have the core. That's the good news with that. Barkov and Kachuk, they're there. But as far as the ability to reset and 2 million average per player, it's I'm not saying it's not a last hurrah. I don't want people to confuse that, but it's going to be a hard time adjusting when 24, 25 comes, but it's going to be, I think of like also the Boston Bruins too, where they make it in 11, win, go a while without making the Stanley Cup final. They made it in 2013, excuse me. Make it back in 2019, go a little while. So it's not going to be like an every year you're making the cup. And who knows, that could be Florida, where they're still in the dance. They have the consistent, and I hear them, and I hear Nick Fairbanks knocking on wood. But you're still winning around. You're still in the division race. And that still speaks volumes, and that is still convincing the people from the outside, like you said in the beginning of this segment, possibly taking a pay cut to set in order for the ultimate goal, winning.
Yeah, and I think this ultimately comes down to 2 points, okay, under Zito, right? So, number one, you have all the draft capital that he traded away going for it last year, right? All these first round picks, that's coming back to bite us right now. Let's be honest, because there's no, because I'll be honest, what prospect are you really, really excited about outside of Samo?
Mike Benning. But
you get what I'm saying is like Florida does not have people that can come in, make an impact, and have less than $1 million cap hit. You know, they don't have the luxury of pulling off what the Seattle Seahawks did with Russell Wilson on a rookie contract and being able to load up everywhere else. This is also a culmination of paying guys their money. You have Barkov at $10 million, you have Bobrovsky at $10 million, you have Tkachuk at what, $9.5 million. You still have Ekblad at $7.5 million, and there's other guys that are coming in making more money. So this is like uncharted water for Florida. I don't think that they've ever really had to have these kind of contracts before, and it's going to be very interesting to see how Zito wants to maneuver around that, or maybe he starts this is the season where, hey, maybe, you know, last season we were supposed to reset, and this is supposed to be like, if we make the playoffs, if we don't, it's okay. This wasn't the season we're going to go for it. Look what that turned into. So who knows what's going to happen this year? I think expectations are still high. You just need to really see, number one, if the team is going to be able to hack it to get into the playoffs. And if not, you need to sell and you need to recruit draft capital to restock the cupboards and get those guys in who are going to make less than $1 million.
And this still stands in no matter what sport. Good GMs get rid of good players a year too early instead of a year too late. And you never know what Bill Zito could have up his sleeve when coming to trade deadline, saying, "Hey, we're not going to pay you. Let's get something out of it, and use that money somewhere else." Like he did that with Duclair this year. Yep. They knew they weren't going to bring him back. They wanted a guy who was well on the other end of the puck too. So it's a give and take in this situation as well. So it's definitely something to look ahead, but also knowing what is coming based on what happens this year as well. But Nick, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this Fairbanks Friday edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Thank you once again for joining me. Tell everybody where they can follow you online.
Armando, thanks again. Great show today. So thank you for that. Everybody can follow me on Twitter, of course, at Prudentious0. I know you guys have heard it. And I'm also on Threads. I think I'm at Bure1096. If not, I will tweet it out later this evening, and we'll get some follows and we'll get some flow going to this whole thing. But Armando, another week in the books, man. Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend. And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Roden, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And every dayers, make sure you come back on Saturday. Yes, Saturday, because it is the 1-year anniversary of the trade. On Saturday's edition of the show, we'll be discussing the trade, what happened then, how we process it now, and look forward to hopefully some more great memories with Matthew Tkachuk here in South Florida. So I'm Armando Velez with Nick Fairbanks, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.